My name's Kevin Baugh. I'm a director here at Sikich. I lead the teams responsible for penetration testing, ethical hacking, as well as our incident response team. And we're here to talk today about some new cybersecurity controls that you want to make sure your organization has on their radar to protect against the cyber threats out there today. If you have questions throughout the talk, please place them in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on that and answer any questions you have throughout, so don't need to hold them to the end. And with that, we'll get started. So if you're not familiar with Sikich, a little about Sikich, we're a large professional services firm, 1,600 people across the firm, doing a variety of services, audit, tax, accounting, technology, those types of things. I actually, like I said, work in our cybersecurity arm. We do a variety of different things. For one, right there in the top, forensic investigations. So Sikich is one of only about 12 organizations countrywide that are certified by their credit card brands to do PCI forensic investigations. So we get to investigate like credit card breaches. So that's one of the things we look at. We do vulnerability scanning, compliance and risk audits and assessments. As I mentioned, penetration testing. Our team breaks into organizations to find where the weaknesses are, and those types of things. So what I'll be talking about today in terms of the weaknesses and the controls is mainly from lessons learned from the forensic investigations we've done, and ways that we've found a break in during penetration testing that we've done as well. So before we get into the controls, I think it's important to kind of talk through what are the key threats that are happening today, and then kind of what are some of the basics that you have to have in place before you start thinking about what's new. Um, and so we get into the key threats. The biggest one that should be at everybody's radar today is ransomware. As an organization, how a ransomware attack starts for you, it's typically, like I said, show here, a bad Monday morning. You walk into the office and people are trying to log in and they're like, I can't get into my applications. There's a bunch of weird messages when I try to access my files. Like nobody can suddenly work. And what's happened is a bad guy has broken into your network, kind of lurked around your network for a while, waiting for the perfect opportunity, finding your critical data, finding your backups, stealing some data, all that kind of stuff, and then waiting usually for a weekend when no one's looking, and then encrypting all your data so that they want you to pay a ransom to pay some cryptocurrency, and then they'll give you the decryption keys to unlock that data. And ransomware is such a big impact for people when if you as an organization fall victim to ransomware. Your applications are offline. Clearly, you can't do business. You can't do work. You can't service your customers. We see these threat actors are working very hard to hunt down and delete backups. We saw a lot of cases in the last 10 years where people were going from tape-based backups to like disk-based backups because everybody, their IT provider was telling them disks are faster, disks will, be cheaper, all that kind of stuff. Nobody realized back then when everybody was making that change from tapes to disks that those disks are always turned on, always online, always on the network. And if an attacker breaks into your network and steals all your password, suddenly that attacker can delete those backups with just a few keystrokes. So they're doing that. They're coming at you with ransom demands. You're dealing with infected systems, so you got to go and try and clean up all the computers that they touched. And they even expanded that to where they now have shaming sites, where you as a victim your name might show up on this website that they host that says, hey, we've broken into this company, here's 5% of the data we stole from them. If they don't pay the ransom within 48 hours, we're going to post the rest of it right here. And even more recently, we're seeing this trend of ongoing harassment where right after the ransomware attack on your network, they're calling leaders in your company and other people associated with your company and just trying to aggravate people into reacting, into paying the ransom and things like that. So yeah, ransomware is huge right now. And why is ransomware so huge? Well, we're kind of at what I like to call the perfect storm for these ransomware attacks. We've got a lot of new vulnerabilities coming out. You still see them in the news. A couple, last year it was Exchange. We saw firewall and remote access vulnerabilities. So there's still new vulnerabilities, even in mature software like Microsoft Exchange, that allow attackers to get a foothold where they shouldn't. Combining that with, in the last few years, a big trend to move people to work from home. To support that, a lot of organizations turned down remote access services, work from home services. That just increased their attack surfaces. It added new ways for bad guys to log in as well. Combining that with kind of years of us teaching bad password practices that make it easier for attackers to steal passwords, guess passwords. We'll talk about some of those password practices a bit later, but and then underlying all of that, the emergence of cryptocurrency. Never before has a bad guy who is trying to extort you by stealing data or by encrypting your data been able to request a ransom that's, 6 figures, 7 figures, and get that paid instantly and anonymously. But cryptocurrency lets them do that. So we've built this huge industry where the attackers are just growing and growing because they're having successful attacks and using those to hire more attackers and do more successful ransomware attacks. But that's not the only thing that we need to watch out for today. Our forensic team is regularly working still today, electronic payment fraud cases, almost always related to an email account takeover. Um, you're probably familiar with these. I'm surprised they're still happening because everybody should be very familiar with them. But the reason they're still happening is the threat actors are getting craftier and craftier and craftier. The message email example here I have on the screen is derived from a case that we just recently worked. Um, the threat actors had gotten into one of the mailboxes of one of the two parties involved, had lurked there for weeks or possibly even months, just waiting for the exact right moment where this organization and one of their vendors were kind of talking back and forth about this invoice. Hey, I sent you the invoice. Hey, something about our bank. And what the attacker did was, once they saw that, they set up some rules in the mailbox that said, hey, when this message comes through from this company, hide it from the real recipient, and I will make a fake message with my own information in it. And those are the types of things they're doing. They're kind of in the middle of that communication, watching it, changing it, and it can be as simple a change as just changing a few bank account details, and the money goes to the wrong place. And these get combined with, they're coming through multiple channels with, not just email, but they're making phone calls, all that kind of stuff to make it seem real, to be engaged with their victims. And then finally, we're still seeing cardholder data breaches. If you take credit card payments on your website, this is the most common place where we're seeing these credit card breaches. Um, Even for customers or organizations that are taking credit card payments kind of through another entity, you just link your site somewhere else for that credit card payment to happen. Attackers, so many people are doing that nowadays. Attackers are finding ways to do that through things like card skimming, redirecting those payments, card skimming on the website. So still a problem today, something to have on your radar if you are, taking any credit card payments, any online payments. My example here from like real world attack, this little block of code here just shows you how tricky it is, how tricky these attackers can be. The second to the last line there that starts with at preg replace, that one line of code is a line of code an attacker hid in one web page on a web server that had thousands of these web pages. That one line of code gave that attacker a fully featured backdoor into the server. They could run any command they wanted on the server because that one piece of code would interpret the input they gave and let them change files, upload files, change the way that the application behaved um, through that just tiny, very you know well obfuscated and hard to find backdoor. So those are the threats to kind of have on your radar. Um, Before we get into some of these new controls, first you want to make sure you're doing the basics well. Doing the basics well, doing the things your organization should already be doing, um, gets you like 80% of the way there or better. Most of the breaches I've worked, if the organization had done all these kind of basics, that attack probably wouldn't have been successful. Um, And those basics are multi-factor authentication for all remote access and all email access today. Everybody's kind of gotten on board finally that, well, I shouldn't say everybody, we're still working with organizations that have a breach. We learn afterwards that they've got like a remote access VPN or remote desktop that's just a username and password. You really need multi-factor authentication on any of that remote access for employees. And again, today it needs to be on your email access as well. You need to have a token on your phone or something, a second factor to get in even to the email, because we're seeing so many of those email account takeover attacks that lead to payment fraud or other manipulation that lead to a foothold in the network. The next bullet here, commercial antivirus installed everywhere. We see a lot of our attacks where the breaches that we work where the attacker took advantage of just a few computers on the network that, for whatever reasons, weren't running antivirus. Maybe it was a test server that somebody set up and they never got around to putting it on it. Maybe it was a really important database and they were worried about performance, so they skipped antivirus. Maybe it was just some workstations that the admin had overlooked or it got corrupt and they didn't fix it. And anyway, the attackers are finding those gaps, finding those holes, and that's the systems they use as their like base of operations to then lurk for a while, conduct the rest of the attack. And then I say bells and whistles enabled. Again, that's what I call the features that are like the threat prevention, the behavior analytics, software firewalling. Um, those are the types of things that help stop attacks beyond just a virus that kind of infects one machine to the next. It stops the evil behaviors that the attackers are doing. But we see a lot of organizations turning those off because they don't know if those features are beneficial or they feel like those features might be getting in the way of operations. Next bullet here, patch management. For operating systems, everybody knows about that. You need to have Windows patched. Browsers, people generally know about that, but we see some gaps there. It is one way that attackers can kind of get viruses from infected websites down to local computers. But a big thing here is firewalls and VPN appliances. In the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of breaches that happened because people weren't patching their firewalls in the same way they were patching their Windows computers, thinking, well, that firewall is a security appliance. It should be secure. It doesn't need patches. Well, it turns out a lot of vendors had released security patches in the last few years, and some of those were for critical vulnerabilities. And if you wait a year or longer to patch your firewall, that can be a route in for these bad guys. Log retention. We work a lot of cases where, especially these ransomware cases, we come in on Monday morning to help and they say, yeah, tell us when the bad guy got in, tell us how the bad guy got in. And we jump on the network, we go onto the Windows servers, the domain controllers, and we find out that the event logs, the security event logs that would tell us when did the attacker log in, where did they log in from, are still on their default settings, and there's only 2 days worth of login history. So we really can't tell you when the attacker came on your network even a week or two ago because you've only got 2 days of log history. They ask, did they exfiltrate data? We go look at the firewall. The firewall, again, doesn't store more than a couple days worth of logs. We can't tell you what systems talk to what evil Russian websites or whatever to exfiltrate data. That data is long gone, even 2 or 3 days later. System hardening. There's a lot of things you can do to harden your Windows computers. There's standards out there to do it. And a lot of what the attackers do after they get that initial foothold that allows them to get admin access, we call it privilege escalation. Those privilege escalation attacks primarily take advantage of weak system hardening, old settings in Windows, old legacy Windows protocols that when they're still enabled, when you didn't harden those servers and workstations, let the attackers steal passwords or pass passwords around in ways they're not supposed to, and things like that. Phishing awareness exercises, you're all aware of those. Just be aware that they are very effective. If I tell somebody to look out for phishing and then I send them a phishing attack, they're going to fall for it, 20% of the time or better. If I have been sending a phishing exercise to someone, even like 2 or 3 times a year, the likelihood they're going to click on that next attack goes way down into the like 4 or 3% click-through rate. And then finally, cyber liability insurance. Definitely should be something on your radar if you don't have it. If you have one of these breaches, Your costs are things like hiring legal counsel to figure out what kind of notifications you have to do to customers and maybe the public or other impacted parties, hiring an incident response firm like Sikich to help with the recovery, hiring IT staff to help restore systems and things like that, or hiring temporary IT resources to restore systems, aside from maybe paying a ransom to get your data back. Very helpful to have cyber liability insurance to help with those things. All right, so that's the background. Hopefully, I wasn't really telling you anything you didn't already know, but was reinforcing how important those things were. Here's where we get to the new stuff. Here's where we get to the important stuff. So, before I talk about the control, I'd like to show you kind of the attacks that are happening that make it important. And the attack I want to talk about here is password spraying and credential stuffing. So I've got a little video here. This video demonstrates um, scraping passwords from the internet. When bad guys break into websites or companies, one of the things they like to do is call password theft. They steal the password databases and then they dump them to the internet. So we get these password dumps. These password dumps are typically an email address and then the password that that person used at that company. So there's lots of these dumps out there. And Sikich, our penetration testing team, collects those off the dark web, just like anybody else might, any of the other attackers might. So we can use it during pen testing. And this video is going to show where we're searching that batch of dumps. And I'm just going to search for the string andsons.com. So I'm searching for any company or any domain name, email address that include andsons.com. So I'm not picking any specific company. And you see, as soon as I started that search, it starts scrolling through this data and just giving email address and then colon a password. So this might be, what's an example here? We've got JCS at daviesandsons.com, use this S2734 whatever password. He might have used that on LinkedIn before LinkedIn had a breach, or any one of the companies that had a password dump in the last some years. This is what that dump looks like, and we're able to search this and find these email address and password combinations. And if I let this run, like this would scroll like this for minutes, 10 minutes or more. There's thousands of these uh, password combinations out there. And how attackers use those is a couple ways. One is password spraying. It means I just take a common password. Hey, I see a lot of people used starpup as a password. I'll send starpup to, uh, I'll try and log into a service as every user using just the starpup password. Maybe I'll get in. So I can do, as an attacker, I can do thousands of guesses with that one password. As long as I'm guessing different accounts, the account lockouts don't take place. But even more relevant is this credential stuffing, where okay, I've got this JCG and Sons at Comcast.net with this password. If he used that password on LinkedIn when they had the breach, maybe he used that password elsewhere. I'll try and log into every bank as that password. I'll try and log into Facebook as that password. I'll try and log into PayPal as that password. And here I've got thousands of different username and password and combinations I could try against systems to help me kind of as an attacker get that first foothold, maybe into an organization to then move into a ransomware type attack. See to the next slide. So how do we protect against that? I mentioned a little bit ago, we've been teaching people horrible password practices and telling them they were the best ones for years. And that horrible password practice, and I'm sure you guys all know it, is you should set an 8-character password and make sure you munge it up with letters and numbers and characters. And I've got an example of that here on the screen. It's the word Spartans. But I've leet speaked it with a 5 instead of an S and an @ sign instead of the A. I added an exclamation point at the end. That's how we taught people to do passwords. Those are actually horrible passwords. They're hard for humans to remember. I'm trying to think, was the A an @ or was the E a 3? Like, which symbols did I change? So I end up writing it down. I end up using the same number in multiple places, reusing it over and over again in different places. Um, it's a bad password for humans. And you know what? It's a stupid password for computers, because computers nowadays can guess that password in 48 hours. We have probably costs about $3,000 to build today server in our forensic lab or in our pen testing lab that we call our cracking server. It's got a bunch of graphics cards in it that automate the process of guessing passwords. And if I'm on your network and I find an encrypted password in like a password file, or in traffic on the network, this encrypted password getting sent on the network, if that password is just 8 characters long, no matter how complex it is, our cracking server can get to the real password, the plain text password, in 48 hours. So 8 character passwords, no matter how complex, are terrible. And that's why we're trying to teach people to go to passphrases. Now, when I say passphrases, people just think, oh, it's a longer password. I've got all the same problems I've got with passwords today, but it's just longer, so it's worse. And that's not the case at all. When you go to passphrases, you have to think very differently. The example I have here is flying purple snail gallon. So I want you to picture a purple snail with a 10-gallon hat and wings. And that's how you remember flying purple snail gallon. A year from now, if I asked you what was that password, there's a good chance you'd remember what it was. It's easy for humans to remember. And you know what? That password is really hard for computers to guess. It's too long. It goes from 48 hours to thousands of years, because combinations of words, there's a lot more words than there are letters and symbols. So the result of these passphrases, you're not only making it harder for computers to guess, but you're also making it harder for employees to do some of those poor behaviors, like reusing passwords in multiple places or setting weak passwords and things like that. And you know what else is cool? When you move to passphrases, the industry guidance says you can back off some of those other things that have been annoying in the past. You can see my flying purple snail gallon is all lowercase with no symbols or letters. That's just fine. It's still more mathematically complex than the Spartan's password. Um, and we're even saying, because of this, maybe password changes every 90 days aren't required. A lot of guidances and a lot of organizations are going to, hey, we only change password if something happens that requires us to change a password. This changing your password every 90 days isn't really adding much security. Going to these passphrases adds so much more security. So yeah, passphrases, not just longer passwords, but understanding the concept of passphrases, teaching your employees how to set good passphrases can have a huge impact on improve your security. Next attack tactic that's really big right now is bypassing that multi-factor authentication. One way we see that is with what we call a man-in-the-middle attack. I'm sure you guys probably, if you work with Microsoft, you've seen the Microsoft sign-in screen here. I doubt anybody noticed, unless they looked really close, that microsoftonline.com in the address bar is spelled wrong. And this is exactly how these attackers are doing these attacks. This is actually a fake Microsoft login screen. It looks just like the real one. It acts just like the real one. It's got a security certificate, because you can get those for free now. And what the threat actors are doing are finding multiple ways to entice someone to click on a link that goes to this screen, or even do something more tricky. They call it tab nabbing, where if I can get you to click on a link to go to a server I control, who cares what that server is? Maybe it's I've breached the local Boy Scout troops website. And I'm like, hey, click here for information about our upcoming Boy Scout events. And you click there and you're looking at the page and it shows the Boy Scout events. Um, you know, 2 minutes later, when you're not looking, the attacker will have code on that web page that will flip it, so it becomes the Microsoft login screen. And the next time you sit down at your computer, you see the Microsoft login screen. Maybe you don't remember how you got there. Maybe you're used to, oh, I get logged out once in a while. I want to log back into my email. So you just log in. So many different ways is they're just getting this screen up on your computer and enticing you, or expecting you to hopefully log in. And what happens is, when you log into this, you're actually talking to the attacker's server. The attacker's talking to Microsoft. So the login works, even including your multi-factor authentication, that token that you give them to log in with. Everything works from your perspective. You don't realize that all your traffic, including your multi-factor token and any session keys that let you stay logged in, went through the attacker's server. The attacker has that now. They're into your mailbox. They're into your SharePoint environment. They're into everything Microsoft will give you access to. And it's not just Microsoft. They can do this to front end Google. They can do this to front end pretty much any services. So multi-factor authentication is not a fix for everything, because there's many mechanisms to bypass this. So how do you protect against that? There's a really cool service out there. It's called Protective DNS. If you're not familiar with DNS, what DNS is, it's the service that, hey, if you look up something like where do I find Microsoft.com in the internet on the internet? What's their address? DNS returns that address. You can see an example of one there, 20.84.181.62. So a normal DNS service, Google provides DNS services, your ISP, like, Time Warner, Roadrunner, Comcast, they all provide DNS services. Those normal DNS services will provide the IP address for anything you look up, even like evilhackersite.ru or something like that. Um, Protective DNS adds an additional layer there where it's going to scrutinize that name that you're trying to look up, and it's only going to respond if it seems like it's a legitimate name. If that seems like it's a risky name or an evil name, the protective DNS will return with a not found. And that's what I'm kind of showing on the screen here. Again, if you didn't notice, I'm looking up Microsolt.com, SOLT, which is, probably not a very safe website to go to. Google would give you the IP address of that just fine and say, go right ahead and go there. But if you look up if you get one of these protective DNS services, it's going to say, no, I'm not going to let you go there. And that's super helpful. On that last screen, I just showed you how they've got that man in the middle attack. Well, it's likely that that website that hosts that man in the middle attack was recently created by the attacker before they got any takedown notices, because that happens kind of quick within a few days, usually when they start, collecting passwords for some of these evil sites. And it's not trusted. So protective DNS would not even have allowed your computer to go to that screen. And the other cool thing about protective DNS is it's relatively inexpensive. There's free services out there. Even the paid services aren't very expensive. And it's really easy for an organization to put in place because it's really just changing the setting where you tell your network to go look for DNS lookups. Instead of telling it to go to Google or go to your ISP Comcast, you tell it to go whatever protective DNS service you choose. So really great, really useful control with a very low barrier to put that in place. Another multi-factor authentication uh, bypass technique we're seeing a lot of today is called multi-factor authentication fatigue, or MFA fatigue. And what this is, you guys are probably already feeling it throughout the day, especially throughout the workday. You're probably getting prompted with multi-factor authentication prompts all day long for different reasons. They all work a little bit different. Some of them just have you type in a code. Some of them have you press OK, that's me, those types of things. Attackers are taking advantage of the fact that people are getting barraged with these multi-factor authentication codes and doing more barraging. If they get your username and password, they'll just start trying to log in, and they'll do that once an hour, a couple times a day, over and over again, hoping that one of those times when you get that prompt, instead of saying, no, this wasn't me, or ignoring it, you might mistakenly, or whatever reason, click, yeah, sure, that's me. And now you've let them in. And we've worked and continue to work a lot of breach cases where that initial point in was somebody just clicking, yeah, that's me, go ahead and go in, or typing in a code or something like that. Because again, they got confused by the number of multi-factor authentication prompts they're just getting throughout the day. And we here in the security industry are seeing that and working on ways to make that better. Two really cool ways that are available. One is called conditional access. Conditional access means I don't always prompt you for multi-factor authentication when you try and log in. I only prompt you in certain situations, or I let you through without it in certain situations. A good example would be, if you're coming from the office, multi-factor authentication prompts aren't requested. I had a discussion with a few folks recently. They're like, well, why would we turn that off? Doesn't that make us less secure? Why don't we just prompt for multi-factor authentication all the time? Well, actually, that can make you less secure because of this MFA fatigue. Whereas if you're in the office and you get a multi-factor authentication prompt, suddenly that seems unusual. Suddenly that's like, okay, I don't expect to see this now. That's weird. I'm not going to click on it. It might make people more aware. It's going to reduce that MFA fatigue. So taking advantage of your authentication system's conditional access to use other factors than just a multi-factor authentication prompt to figure out if somebody can be trusted goes really far in stopping some of this MFA fatigue. And the other one is a number matching feature. So a lot of times, when people roll out Microsoft's MFA, um, the initial MFA is just the, hey, is this you? Are you trying to log in? And you click yes. And that's a really easy thing to do, that MFA fatigue, click yes. I think it's me. It's probably me. Maybe my computer's trying to log in. I'm upstairs getting lunch right now. Just click yes so it stops bugging me. Switching to what we call number matching, where instead of just saying, are you trying to log in, the phone will prompt you or the PC will prompt you, hey, if you're trying to log in, type in this number from your phone to your PC, or type in this number from your PC on your phone. You're proving that the human, you, are in control of both of those things. You're the one logging in on both ends. Again, a great protection from MFA fatigue because it gets in the way of that attacker taking advantage of that. The next attack tactic to be aware of, in the hacking world, we call it living off the land with windows and binaries and scripts, which is a long way of saying we're not using viruses. We're not putting viruses on your computer. We're just using features in Windows to hack Windows. Um, there's a lot of built-in features in Windows that have just been there forever that have a lot of power. You're probably familiar with PowerShell, or at least have heard of PowerShell if you're in the tech world, which is just a scripting language on Windows to let you automate things. And a lot of these ransomware attacks just heavily use PowerShell to run scripts and that let them encrypt and steal data and things like that. And there's even components of Windows that let an attacker, like, instead of downloading malware, they can push the source code for malware to your computer and then have your computer compile it and make the virus on the computer itself. Um, so pretty tricky things that allow them, even if you've got antivirus installed and up to date, that living off the land tactic can bypass the antivirus. Because like I said, they're not copying any viruses to your computer. They're just using features of your computer to do evil things. So how do you protect against that? Um, the biggest protection against that is endpoint detection and response applications. If you're not familiar with endpoint detection and response applications, they're kind of the next generation of what firewall does, or I'm sorry, what antivirus does. It's kind of a step up from your antivirus, or even a replacement for your antivirus. They do what the antivirus does typically, but they also provide things like application whitelisting, where only trusted applications can run on the computer. Even trusted scripts, only trusted scripts can run on the computer. Advanced firewalling, where they know this is a good host or a trusted host you're trying to talk to from this workstation. These are evil hosts on the internet. I'm not going to let you talk to them. Host intrusion monitoring. So they're not just looking at what did the application that tried to do this look like? Did it look like a virus? But looking at the behaviors that are happening. Is someone attempting to run suspicious scripts? Or are they attempting to call the functions that read passwords from memory? Are they doing things that would elevate their privilege or exfiltrate data? So endpoint and detection response applications give you all those features. They're the way you stop and detect that hacker that's gotten a small foothold on your network and is trying to get onto servers to start encrypting data, or get onto file servers to start copying data and stealing data, get on your databases, things like that. They're the tool that help you detect that where antivirus might not. Um, and they're also really awesome because apart from detecting that at the point in time, they're typically built to help you with the research after the fact. So if you've had an attack, um, hopefully you've been notified about it very quickly by this EDR application, but then you've got some really powerful tools to go and look into it as well and figure out what happened. I've got a few names of some of the common ones out there: Carbon Black, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike. So if you don't know what EDR is, at least you know where to start looking and learning about these. There's a lot more out there, but these, we definitely see that these are very effective. In fact, we and a lot of other organizations that do ransomware breach incident response, um, one of the first steps that we'll do in a lot of breach incident response is deploy one of these tools to the client site to help us start to find the malware and clean up the machines. So, we use those tools for researching at the time of an incident. And if that had been there before it even started, it probably wouldn't have even been an incident. Another attack tactic to be aware of is command and control channels. So once that attacker gets a foothold on your computers, on your servers, on your workstations, It's no good to them unless they can talk to themselves out on the internet, and then the attacker can use that to exfiltrate data, steal data. They can use that to give commands like, hey, start encrypting now, hey, delete this backup now. Those are called command and control channels, and it's an opportunity for you to stop that attack, because those command and control channels have to go through your perimeter. They have to go through your firewall. They have to go between your hosts and the internet. And uh, Today's newer firewalls have a lot of features that will block this type of traffic, but those features have to be enabled and tuned. It doesn't just happen automatically. Um, there are features like web content filtering, where you say, okay, you're probably familiar with this. You say, okay, we put in web content filtering. Our employees can't get to pornography and gambling sites and things like that. But did you look at how it's set to deal with uncategorized sites? Most by default are set to allow uncategorized, because it's kind of a pain for IT that people are blocked trying to go to a new startup website or something like that. But most of these malicious sites that you might use to download malware or for command and control or phishing or things like that are uncategorized because they're too new, because they're evil. You need to block that uncategorized category. And then look at other features on that firewall to block traffic that just seems risky or isn't required. Do that geographically, do that via threat analytics plugins. Again, the firewall knows which hosts out on the internet are to be trusted and which hosts out on the internet probably aren't to be trusted, and can block that kind of traffic and detect it before it allows the attack to occur. And then in addition to trying to detect and block that at the firewall, the other key control here is log and event analytics. Um, this is the last really important way that you can improve your ability to detect that bad guy on the network early before they've been able to do anything evil. And that's by using the information that's already going to the logs on your systems, and mining that in real time for bad guys doing bad things. It might be someone creating an admin account at 2 in the morning. It might be 20 attempts to log into an admin account with wrong passwords. It might be impossible travel, where somebody logged in from New York and Beijing at the same time. All those types of events are going into your logs today. All those types of events would have told you an attacker was starting an attack, made a few steps in, but hadn't finished it yet. Um, and there's ways to detect those today. The two mechanisms are called the SIM is the first one, or Security Information Event Management System. It's basically a server appliance you put on your network. It collects and stores logs from other servers, from workstations, from your firewall. It might even monitor network traffic and basically gather all that data and then mine it for those suspicious events I was talking about. SIMs are awesome. The challenge with a SIM is you're going to pay for the SIM, and then you're going to need knowledgeable staff to maintain that SIM, keep tuning it with new rules for the new attacks that it's looking for, reviewing all the alerts that it finds and figuring out which ones are real alerts, which ones are false positive, things like that. So for a lot of organizations, a SIM's the right answer. For a lot, it's not, because of that care and feeding effort. And that's where a MSSP, or managed security service provider, comes in. An MSSP is essentially that SIM service, but in the cloud. And instead of your employees doing all that tuning and care and feeding, the SOC employees, the employees of the MSSP company, are doing that. And in theory, they can do that more effectively, because they're doing, if a new attack vector comes out, they can put that rule in all of their client SIMs, and kind of, again, economy of scale there. They can do it more effectively for less cost than maybe doing it on site with your own SIM. And you still get that 24/7 humans reviewing the escalated alerts and calling you up if it looks like you actually have a breach. So that's the kind of last. It's a big step, but it's a really important step to getting to detecting these attackers before they do anything evil. And then the last attack tactic, and I can't stress this one enough, is that they're destroying backups. It turns my stomach every time we start working a ransomware breach with someone who just, it's Monday morning, we just had a breach, and my first question is, are your backups safe? Where are they? because if your backups are safe, you can recover without paying the ransom. Um, if the attackers deleted your backups, you're in a world of hurt. It's terrible. Um, and it's not that hard, crazily not that hard for them to find ways to delete the backups. What I'm showing here is a factory reset screen from a disk station device, which is a storage device that a lot of organizations use for their backups. If the attacker found this password in a password file or keylogged it off an admin's computer or something, they had to go to this one screen and click two buttons, and they could factory reset that and delete all the backup data. So how do you protect against that? Cloud-based backups seem to be the best solution for that for a lot of organizations. It seems less expensive nowadays to just move your backup data to the cloud than to start putting in expensive equipment on premises for that backups. You get the benefits that it's off-site. You get the benefits that it's got multi-factor authentication. Typically, these cloud-based backup services today won't let a logged-in user permanently delete backups without some type of time frame involved or multiple steps. The attackers just don't have the capability to delete those cloud-based backups. If you can't do that, if you've already invested in a pretty expensive on-premises backup system, or you've got large volumes of data, I've worked with people in the TV industry who have terabytes and terabytes of video data. They're like, I can't put that in the cloud. Well, then you can move those on-premises backups to what we call a hardened enclave, a separate network segment from the rest of the network. And to get into that hardened enclave as any type of administrator, you're going to want multi-factor authentication with different credentials than the rest of the network. And that way, if an attacker gets on your network and steals every admin password on your network, they still can't get into the backups and delete the backups. So important. So that was a lot. This last screen here is your best chance for a screen capture. If you want to go back to your IT folks and say, are we doing all these things? Are we looking at these things? Quick list of those new controls that, again, should be on your radar, should be someplace on the roadmap to make sure you're managing your risk. However, if you want some help kind of looking to that as a thank you so much for everybody who joined today, if you reach out to us, we can set up a free 30-minute consulting session. I'll sit down with you or your IT staff or whoever, and you decide how you want to use that time. I can talk through and ask some questions, and we can have some discussions to check if you're doing those basics well. Talk through in a little more depth. What are some of the gaps, and do you guys have those gaps, or are you strong on those basics? Or talk through, here's the new security controls for your organization. Which one's going to provide the most value? Which one should you be thinking of next? When should you put it in place? Or if you don't go down that path, if you have other risks that you have on your radar, your leadership's worried about, second opinion on some advice you're getting from your IT provider, glad to provide that. Or if nothing else, I see a lot of organizations between audit work, pen test work, and our incident response work. I see across all different industries, what do people have in place? What are they missing? What do they look like? And if you want to know, are we keeping up with our peers? Are we falling behind? How do we stand next to our peers? I can absolutely, kind of have some discussions with you and let you know how you stand in that regard as well. So if you're interested in anything like that, just let us know. There'll be a survey here at the end of the webinar, or you can email netsec@sikich.com, and we'll set up that call. And with that, we are at the end of the slides, but I'm definitely here available if anybody has any questions they want to place in the chat. And there's also a poll that's been put in there if you do want to have someone reach out to you. Thoughts on enabling Microsoft Hello for users in a business environment? You've asked me something I don't know anything about. I'm not familiar with Microsoft Hello. So I don't have thoughts. I don't know if there's other Sikich folks on the call from our IT solutions team that do know about Microsoft Hello and would want to jump in and provide any advice on that. Any suggested protected DNS service? So kind of the Kleenex of protected DNS is Cisco's Umbrella, which they bought out from OpenDNS. But if you Google for protective DNS, one of the first three hits is a document from the Department of Homeland Security that outlines protective DNS services in general, and then provides a good list as well. Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint slides? I will have to get back to you on that one, how we might be able to distribute the slides. Do you see new requirements to renew cyber insurance going forward? Yes, that's a really good point. We are seeing a lot of organizations, this time when they're trying to renew their cyber insurance, two things are happening. Number one, the premium's going way up because the insurance companies are paying out so many ransoms. But number two, they're getting this checklist of things they have to have in place. Most of them, I'm sorry, most of them are already covered in that doing the basics well list that I had there. Some of them are the new cybersecurity things. One that's tripping a lot of people up that our IT solutions folks, we do managed services and other IT services for a lot of organizations. And the one that I understand is tripping a lot of organizations up is a lot of insurance carriers are requiring firms to require multi-factor authentication for every administrator login. So if administrators at their desk at the office and they need to log into the domain controller to add a new user to the domain, there's an expectation that there's a multi-factor authentication prompt there. That's something that's very new for a lot of companies. There are ways to do that. We've worked, again, Sikich here, we've worked with a lot of our clients to put that in place, but that's probably been one of the more challenging asks from the insurance providers we've seen. Can we get a copy of the recording? I believe the recording is going to be posted, so I'll make sure that everybody on the call gets a link to that once it's posted. Are certificates for OpenVPN good enough for MFA? The certificate being something you have. Tim, they're better than nothing. The challenge is we like to call it your MFA factor should be in hand. So if you're logging in on the computer, the hope is that if somebody infected the computer, they wouldn't be able to log in as you, or maybe they'd be able to catch maybe just that one MFA token, because the second factor's on your phone in hand, something like that. If your second factor is on your computer, if it's a certificate on the computer, and the first factor is your password that you're typing into your computer, you're definitely leaving it open for an attacker that gets a keylogger and kind of file scraper on your computer to be able to log in as you all they want. It's definitely better than them just being able to guess passwords out on the internet. They actually have to get a step on your computer, so it's a pretty strong layer. But for example, for PCI compliance, an OpenVPN certificate on the same computer that you're typing the password into, it would not meet the latest PCI payment card industry requirements for securing someplace that stores credit card data, just because of those risks of you can't have one point of failure for that authentication to happen. Mike has said that recording of today's presentation will be emailed tomorrow. And I think that's all of the questions. My email address is on the screen here, so if you have other questions, please do feel free to reach out to me. And again, thank you all so much for your time today.